Last time. Oh no. These numbers are off the charts.
What do you mean, just cut the orange wire? They're all orange.
You shut up the orphanarian! You ruined Christmas for the orphans! You're a loose cannon! You're off the case! Hand in your bag!
Cancel the bombing, I'm still in the area.
Wait a minute. Which is the original? And which is the clone? Anyway, next time I'll continue answering his questions. Okay, let's continue these questions, see where they lead us.
Number 7. Who's to say that commonalities in appearance, aka homology, means a common ancestor? That's not the fact, that's just their interpretation of the fact. If they look at humans and apes and find similarities, they point out that it's because humans came from apes, or perhaps even apes even came from humans. But couldn't that just be evidence for a common designer?
Commonality does not mean one or two slight similarities between two creatures, but rather a majority of similarities with slight changes. The slight difference in bone structure between fossils trace the evolution between species. It's not simply a matter of this animal has toes, that animal has toes, they're related, but rather the structures are so similar to be almost the same creature, we can see minute changes to trace the step from one species to another. And, as I've mentioned before, we didn't come from apes, we are apes. We are members of the great ape family.
I mean, think about it. Think about the similarities between this iPod Touch and an iPhone and the iPad that I'm recording this on right now. Just think about it.
I'm not sure if you realize this, but iPods don't reproduce sexually. We assume they were designed by a creator because there's no other way for them to come about. We have seen creatures reproduce with slight variations, an observation that supports evolution. No matter how much I smash these iPods together, I'm not going to get another, slightly different iPod produced in any natural way. Well, yeah, isn't it?
I do okay.
Alright, that makes me feel better.
I didn't say it was with you.
Oh. Well, moving on.
Don't similarities prove a common designer with a common style?
That's an unsupportable conclusion. If creatures were similar, you could say it proves a creator with a common style. If creatures were different, you could say it proves a creator who likes to try different things out. Arguments that can claim anything, regardless of the evidence, are useless.
Number 8. What about unrelated organisms that have similar features, such as flight? Bats, birds, and insects all have wings that are capable of flying, yet the evolutionists believe that the wings evolved separately in all of those cases.
Yes, some natural processes and features evolved the same way. Flight was useful for many of the descendants of dinosaurs when they became birds, so they evolved that way. Flight was also useful for insects, so they too evolved a form of it. Just because one set of creatures can do something does not mean that no other organism will be able to do it ever. If something is beneficial, there's no reason to say it won't show up in different evolutionary branches.
Same thing with dolphins and fish. Dolphins look a lot like sharks, they're very similar in design. Well, they breathe air, but other than that, they're pretty much the same thing. Yet the evolutionists believe that the dolphin is more closely related to the dog than the fish. The most common evolutionist rebuttal I hear to this, and I even used this several times before, is convergent evolution. Convergent evolution basically means the same trait forming across two different unrelated organisms at the same time. Basically, sort of as a type of mimicry. In other words, common design proves common ancestry, except when it doesn't. At least that's what they have.
It is not mimicry. The proto-dolphin did not look at fish and go, yep, that's the way to go. While sharks and dolphins do have similar features, a detailed look at them shows how very different they are. Senses, circulatory system, digestion, even skeletal structure and organization are all vastly different. In fact, unlike dolphins, sharks don't even have bones. Their skeleton is completely cartilage. Those features in the dolphin, though, are quite similar to land-based mammals, and we can trace the progression from land-based creatures to ones that went back to the water and eventually to dolphins. The reason they look similar to fish is that a streamlined body is much better for survival in an aquatic environment, so natural processes for creatures trying to survive in the water will select for a more streamlined body.
But there's a much better explanation. They were all created at the same time by the same person.
Perfect. Show me evidence of this person who created them. I'm very intrigued.
Number 9. How do you explain all or nothing structures? All or nothing structures are a term I like to use to describe the structures in organisms that are so complex that if you take one of them out, the entire thing fails.
Simply, parts of an organism that were useful for independent functions began to work together to create a more efficient organism. As independent functions became more specialized and intertwined with other functions in an organism, these functions became dependent on each other until they reached the point where they cannot function without each other.
Other people have called this things like irreducible complexity, but I think all or nothing is a much more easy to understand name. Which evolved first? The stomach? The food that was going to be digested by the stomach? The acid necessary to digest the food? Or the mucus lining that prevents the stomach from digesting itself? If one of those things are taken away, the stomach fails, and so does the whole organism.
The food. Organisms evolved to take advantage of the sources of nutrients that were around them. The ability to take advantage of said nutrients was specialized and adapted over time to become the digestive systems organisms have now.
Same thing with our senses. Think about the eye. To have an eye that sees well, you need to have a cornea, a lens, a retina, and an optic nerve.
Yes, our eyes are very interdependent on different functions to work correctly, and that's because they've had millions of years of evolution to become so complex. The first precursor to the eye was a simple light-sensitive cell. All it would have been able to do would be tell the difference between light and dark, a simple, but at the time very useful adaptation. Over the many generations, it would become more and more complex until we have what is our eye.
Even Charles Darwin himself said that the eye is so complex that to suggest that it evolved by mere chance is absurd in the highest possible degree. Though he did go on for a few more pages about how he believed it anyway, but still, he admitted that it's absurd.
Quote mining. Nice. If we can only use one part of a work without context or the rest of the information, then this should be a showstopper for many theists. I'm glad you admit there's more to what Darwin said, but you really should have read and tried to understand it as well. Yet reason tells me that if numerous gradations from a perfect and complex eye to one very imperfect and simple, each grade being useful to its processor, can be shown to exist. If further, the eye does vary ever slightly and the variations be inherited, which is certainly the case, and if any variation or modification in this organ be ever useful to an animal under changing conditions of life, then the difficulty of believing that a perfect and complex eye could be formed by natural selection, though inseparable by our imagination, can hardly be considered real. Darwin said on the face of it, yes, the eye looks so complex that it couldn't have evolved. But once you get a bit deeper, there was no issue with a slow evolution from light-sensitive cells to the complex eye we have today.
And these aren't just simple things either. Just one small human cell has more complexity than the entire space shuttle.
Yes, this is not surprising in the least that our cells are complex. The first cells that we can find showed up billions of years ago and have had that time to reproduce, mutate, and grow with the best be selected to survive. It's not at all surprising that this continuing process has created such complex beings. And how exactly do you measure complexity? I'm not trying to be superficial here, but by what standard do you say one thing, a cell, is more complex than a completely different thing, the space shuttle?
Which evolved first, the heart, the blood, or the lungs to oxygenate the blood, or the ability to use oxygen in the first place?
The ability to get gases in the first place. Cells were able to get gases through the membrane of the cell wall, long before any other functions evolved to become more efficient at utilizing and transporting these gases.
Which evolved first, the sex drive or the ability to have sex?
The ability to share genetic information came first. The organisms that took advantage of that thrived, and bred into them the drive to continue spreading their information.
Which evolved first, the brain or the eyes that take in information?
The eye. Light-sensitive cells will cause an organism to react without the need for a brain. Even plants that don't have a brain are able to sense and respond to light.
This takes me back to one of my original questions. Which came first, male or female?
Female. The specialization between genders only came about after organisms were able to trade genetic material.
The most obvious answer to all these questions is that they are created at the same time by the same person.
No, the most obvious answer to someone who has studied them is that these functions evolve slowly over time, never all at once.
Number 10. How did music evolve? Evolutionists over the years have had a number of crazy explanations that are both untestable and unfulfilling.
I'm not sure if you understand this, but music isn't alive. It does not evolve in any kind of biological sense. One of the important skills our ancestors developed was pattern recognition. It was instrumental to working out how tools would be used if we could figure out cause and effect. So, we learned to pick up and respond to patterns. Additionally, we had to preserve information before we had writing. passing it on as a pattern made it much easier to remember. So, passing on a group's history through song was much more efficient than simple memorization. Even now, for some of us, it's easier to remember things through song than simple straight facts. I found that out myself. There's antimony, arsenic, aluminum, selenium, and hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and rhenium, and nickel, neodymium, plutonium, germanium, and iron, zirconium, ruthenium, uranium, europium, zirconium.
And honestly, this is more important than you may think. From a physical perspective, music is little more than a series of puffs emitted by a diaphragm in your device, called a speaker. But from a psychological perspective, music is something more. It makes the brain happy or sad. Classical music makes the brain smarter. Techno music makes the brain amped up. How can you explain in a physicalistic point of view how something that's physically just a series of puffs can mean something more to a series of chemicals that they call the brain?
Our brains, that series of chemicals, respond to stimuli. If we didn't, we wouldn't be able to react to anything around us. Music is a stimulus, creating a pattern our brain will respond to. The music that we do respond to gets remembered by composers and built upon. The patterns that do nothing for us get discarded. As composers create successful music that induces an emotional connection, others learn from that and use what has already been developed to replicate and improve on those connections. So, while some musical history does share some similarities with biological evolution, it is not the same thing.
Only a spiritual point of view can fully explain music.
Okay, let's assume for a second that you're right, that only a pure ritualistic point of view can explain music. So what? How does that in any way refute biological evolution? It doesn't. Just because one aspect of the world is not involved with a theory does not make that theory incorrect. It would be like asking, how does plate tectonics explain Dungeons and Dragons? Okay, there we go. Earthquakes are caused by level 15 or above sorcerers. Yes, everyone always forgets about the druids.
Number 11. What has evolution done to science that's good?
He's right. What has evolution ever done for us? Okay, growing better food has been helpful for humanity, but... Okay, refining possible fuel sources is good, but... True, new molecules have been created using our understanding of evolution, but... Okay, well yeah, that goes without saying. Okay, but apart from increasing food production, making better fuel sources, creating new molecules and public health, what has evolution ever done for us? Shut up!
Would it matter if a microbe turned into a microbiologist?
Yeah, because if the original self-replicating molecules didn't change, we wouldn't be here. That's important to me because I place value on the people around me, and to a lesser extent myself.
And by the way, that would actually make science worse, because it would mean that our brains are just the product of chemical reactions. So why trust a mind that is the product of a chemical reaction?
As I said in a previous video, our brains, while very complex chemical systems, have been selected for over time to make non-random decisions. A human with a brain that could not come to correct conclusions would have a much lower chance of survival than one that could be rational. So an evolved brain, I think, would be more likely to be rational than one poofed into existence, because one magicked out of nothing could be designed to only believe what its creator wanted it to, no matter what reality is.
If you can take all the evolution stuff out of the textbooks, there would be no difference in terms of the practical science. There would be no difference in terms of our ability to make vaccines, no difference in our ability to make rocket ships, make medicines, make iPads, make computers, make pretty much anything else scientific. It wouldn't affect chemistry, it wouldn't affect most of biology.
It would totally affect biology. The entire field of biology is dedicated to study the complexity of life. Evolution explains how life has become so diverse, and the study of biology has confirmed the predictions claimed by evolution. As for the good it did, knowledge of biology and evolution helped create high-yield wheat that has saved 1 billion lives. I would say that alone was a pretty significant use.
In fact, I think it actually kind of negatively affects it in some ways. In addition to belittling the human mind, it also spread several farces, like, consider the vestigial organs. Most of the vestigial organs now have a known purpose. Some people would think that the pinky was a vestigial organ, but I regularly use that to type the letter A.
I don't think vestigial means what you think it means. It simply means structures that have lost their original functions. They may have new functions, but their past functions are no longer needed, like the tailbone or appendix in humans, or leg bones in whales. Or, are you saying that several thousand years ago, some intelligent designer being said, I'll add that little finger to humans, so, in a few millennia, a portion of their descendants will be able to type a key, corresponding to a letter in a language that hasn't been invented yet, on a device that no one could even comprehend right now?
Similarly, they also like to talk about embryology, but embryology was later proved wrong. In fact, it was proved wrong hundreds of years ago. and they just kept it in the textbook because they say that it demonstrates the concept of evolution.
I got nothing. How is embryology wrong? Are you claiming we don't come from embryos? Sure, there have been changes in the understanding. Henkel's drawings were discredited and replaced by more accurate ones, and eventually photographs of actual embryos, but nobody disputes where babies come from. Did you not get that talk yet? Do you think the stork really brings babies? Or do you subscribe to the homunculus hypothesis, where the little people inside women who just start to grow?
And also all that junk DNA stuff. There were a few scientists not that long ago who discovered that junk DNA does indeed have a purpose.
Junk DNA is an informal name for non-coding DNA, which are portions of the genome that do not code for proteins. But they do have other functions, like centromeres, which link parts of the chromosome together, or templates for RNA that perform functions such as support for protein synthesis and regulation of gene transcription.
So has evolution helped science or harmed science?
That question doesn't make any sense. Has gravity helped or harmed science? No, it's an observed principle that has been tested and explained using the scientific method. Something doesn't have to be practical to be scientific, it has to be quantifiable.
And finally, number 12. This is the most important question of them all. The question I have for you is, why do you believe in evolution?
That's funny. I thought you said earlier that how life started was the most important question. I accept, not believe, evolution because it has evidence behind it. And it's the only explanation for the diversity of life on Earth that has any evidence. It has been thoroughly studied, has been supported, and never been disproven. Yes, the original theory has been modified and improved upon, but the basic idea that organisms will have slight varieties and those that are the best adapted to survive will survive is the best explanation for how a variety of life has expanded on our planet.
Maybe because it was the only thing you've been taught. Maybe because you've been thoroughly convinced after all these years that evolution is science, but everything else is just a bunch of religion. Maybe because you've only seen the biblical arguments for intelligent design without seeing the actual scientific ones.
That's true. I have not seen any scientific reasoning for intelligent design. There has been no evidence put forth for a supernatural intelligent creator being. The only argument you've put forth so far is, hey, things are too complex for me to understand, so it must have been a god, which is the argument from ignorance, something that does not convince me.
Or perhaps you actually really do believe in creation deep down inside, or maybe it even makes more sense in your brain, but you choose to ignore it because it would erase your moral accountability.
How would that work? I know that an intelligent creator being devised us, and we have to be accountable for our morality, but I don't really want to, so I'll pretend he doesn't exist. If I ever wanted to break the law, I really don't think pretending the police don't exist would be a logical step for me to take.
Or maybe even you really do believe in creation, but you're just calling yourself an evolutionist because you don't want to be ridiculed. Maybe you're a student and you don't want to lose your GPA. Maybe you're a scientist who doesn't want to lose his job.
Scientists want to know what's true. If there really was a creator being and some scientist had some kind of proof, they would present it. And, at the same time, probably win every Nobel Prize, since that would mean major revelations to our knowledge of every branch of science ever. They would never have to worry about getting another job again. They would be the rock stars of the scientific community.
Or maybe you just want to get hits on YouTube for being an atheist.
Oh, believe me, just being an atheist alone does not get me a lot of hits on YouTube. My 36 subscribers, and you're all awesome by the way, will attest to that.
Think about it. Do you really believe in evolution? Do you really believe that everything came from nothing?
No, because again, evolution does not say where life came from, but simply how it can change and it has become so diverse. I'm getting kind of tired of the everything from nothing straw man. Things exist, and if we don't know how they came into being, that does not mean we slot anthropomorphic deity as the answer to everything, especially if we don't have any evidence of one.
Do you really believe that these paper digits that I made so I can count to 12 have been designed, but these actual digits are just the product of random chance?
Not random chance. Our fingers, like every other part of our body, is a result of natural selection, a decidedly non-random process, where creatures that are the best adapted to survive and breed are most likely to pass on those adaptations. Your extra digits have no way of self-replicating, so they were obviously created.
Just think about it. Think about it.
Okay, everything's been answered. You said at the beginning that you used to defend evolution in conversations. I would be very interested in what you had to say, how you could defend it, when you had such massive misunderstandings of it. Anyway, another set down. As always, if any of you have questions for me, please send them my way.